So when we're looking at the cranial bones, there are some very easily seen joints that are very crazy looking, and they're called sutures. Sutures are a type of fibrous joint. You'll learn that in the articulations chapter. It's a fibrous joint. You should be able to remember that because if you've ever had stitching, you've ever had stitches, they use a fiber to suture the two parts of the cut. And so these look like some crazy seamstress was here just sewing these together, and they're called sutures. And there's 4 of them that you need to know. The first one is going to be, if I turn the skull this way, this suture that runs between the frontal bone and the 2 parietal bones, and I'm going to just stop just for a second and make a point of letting you know that all 4 of the sutures surround the parietal bones. So this is the parietal bones between the frontal bone. This is called the coronal suture. And again, it runs along the coronal plane. It's also, the plane can also be called the frontal plane, but this is called the coronal suture because it basically divides the skull anterior, posterior. The next one also runs on a distinct plane. This one runs right between the 2 parietal bones. It basically divides it in half. And things that divide in a plane that divides the body from right to left is called the sagittal plane. So this is the sagittal suture. The sagittal suture divides the 2 parietal bones. So we've got the frontal or coronal suture and the sagittal suture. The other 2 don't play well with names as far as the planes of the body. This one back here that divides the occipital bone between the parietal bones is called the Lamboidal Suture. Now, I have different ways to remember it, but I had a student come up with this, and I think it was really good, that if you like cars, Lamborghinis have their trunk or their engine in the back, in the trunk. And so he said he could remember this was the Lamboidal Suture because Lamborghinis have their engine in the back, which I thought was really good. Now, the last one is called the Squamosal Suture. It is off to the side. Now, this one's kind of weird. This is between the temporal bone and the parietal bones. And this one is called the Squamosal Suture. And if you remember early on you learned that squamous means flat. This suture is anything but flat, but it also does look like the basement membrane between the epithelial, the epidermis and the dermis, and which is the stratified squamous epithelium. So maybe that's where they get the squamosal suture. But those are the 4 sutures: coronal, parietal, lamboidal in the back here, and then squamosal.